fueling scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy should itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
We've signed a climate convention on the importance of economic instruments and free markets. Were included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document and the Rio Declaration. Let me be clear on one fundamental point. The United States fully intends to be the world's preeminent leader in protecting the global environment.
Coming up, Technocracy News. Welcome back to Technocracy News and Trends. I am Patrick Wood, the editor-in-chief of Technocracy.news. Today is April 29, 2019. We're drawing to a close on April. That does not mean that the news has stopped. However, today we have a full slate of things to discuss. Number one, it's an encouraging thing once in a while to see a story of resistance against some aspect of technocracy. Story number one is titled Biometric Smackdown. Backlash grows against facial recognition. This story was produced by Vox, V-O-X, which follows technical issues around the world. And this article is quite encouraging in a way that some publicity is being given to a lawsuit against Apple in size $1 billion. It says the lawsuit filed Monday hinges on the alleged use of an increasingly popular and controversial technology, facial recognition. The tech can identify an individual by analyzing their facial features in images and videos and in real time. Of course, we knew all that. The plaintiff in this case is an 18-year-old college student. He claims that the company's, that is Apple, facial recognition tool led to him being arrested for Apple store thefts he didn't commit by mistakenly linking his name with the face of the real thief. NYPD officers came to Bah's home, that's his name, B-A-H, last name, last autumn to arrest him at 4 a.m. What a way to wake up. Only to discover that they apparently had the wrong guy. Bah says the whole ordeal caused him serious emotional distress. I can identify with that. I've never had that happen to me, but I think I would be severely emotionally distressed as well. So he's turned around and filed a massive lawsuit against Apple because, interestingly, Apple has vehemently denied that it uses facial recognition to identify people in its stores. But in this case, obviously, they did, and they tagged this guy wrongly, went out and arrested him, and I guess it didn't go very much further than that. He didn't end up in court having to defend himself for the next 3 years. Normally, you don't hear these stories in traditional media, and I can tell you exactly why, because we've been observing big pharma and big tech for too long to know what their MO is. Lawyers. That's exactly right. Companies like Monsanto, for instance, which is taking a beating right now because of its chemical weed killer. It's owned by Bayer, actually, and in fact, the CEO of Bayer just recently got sacked because he was the guy that orchestrated bringing Monsanto into the Bayer family. And Monsanto has had a habit over the years of hiring and employing a team of, I hate to use the word junkyard dog lawyers, but this is essentially what it is because they're paid to bully. And whenever they see a story coming from a media company, they go out to that same company and they bully them into suppressing the story. And here's how they do it. I mean, we've seen this happen. It's well documented. First, these teams of lawyers will go out to major publications and tell them, look, if you run a story that is negative towards our company, we will sue your blistering pants off. And so if you don't show us any potential story first to let us have a chance to look at it and rebut it, then you're warned right now that you will be in big trouble. So what happens is then that these companies, media companies, before they run a story, they run it by Monsanto's lawyers. And of course, 99 and 9/10% of them get sacked. Big Pharma's in the same mode, by the way. They have an incredible bully pulpit with the media. If they don't like something, it don't get published. So this is exactly what we see with big tech as well. They have ways to get to these publications before stories are written, so we don't see a lot of this stuff. In this case, this story got published. I'm glad to see that people are getting involved with this kind of a backlash. It's about time. The next story concerns a Japanese company, a household name even in America, though, NEC. NEC is based in Japan, a global corporation for sure. It's as big as any of our global corporations like Intel or IBM or other foreign companies like NVIDIA. They're huge. Well, NEC and Nagasaki University in Japan just announced that they're creating a global facial recognition program based on the United Nations slogan of eradicating poverty and health problems. And they're stressing, leave no one behind. This, of course, is a theme that's popular within the United Nations. We see this phrase everywhere, no one left behind. Because if anybody's left behind, that means the system is going to be somehow less than perfect in their eyes. So the article says, seizing on the chance to turn the UN slogan into a global facial recognition marketing scheme, NEC has modified it slightly, calling it, I won't say the term exactly correctly, I realize that, Fahumu Mama Matoto. That's Kenyan for to know mother and child. If NEC's plan to know mother and child is a success, we can all kiss goodbye any form of traditional privacy for our lives. They're starting this pilot program right now in Kenya, African country, still a little bit backwards in many, many ways compared to the West, but the people there have little ability to resist, and this will allow them to prove their point that they can make it work. And their idea is if they have a biometric database of the entire planet, then not only can poverty be reduced, but also all the health problems of the world can be reduced as well. And just kind of keep that in mind as we look at our third story, which is really the focus today of my commentary. There's a new biodiversity conference this week coming to the United Nations. And, well, you say, thank you, United Nations, for bringing it to us, I guess. They're trying to create a Paris moment. Now, when I say Paris moment, you remember back to the Paris climate change, global warming conference a few years ago. Well, they're trying to create a Paris moment to, quote unquote, rescue nature. Rescue nature. Aren't we lucky? The last biodiversity conference of any significance was back in 1992 through 1995. This one is hoping to be to nature what the Paris conference was to global warming. In other words, put it on steroids and supercharge it. The outcome will extend the 1,100-page Global Biodiversity Assessment from 1995 and specify all human behaviors that are necessary to rescue nature. Wow. So this article says that diplomats from 130 nations gathered in Paris on Monday to validate a grim, mind you, U.S. assessment of the state of nature and lay the groundwork for a rescue plan for life on Earth. The destruction of nature threatens humanity, quote, at least as much as human-induced climate change. So says UN Biodiversity Chief Robert Watson. This 5-day meeting is going to last all this week. He says, we have a closing window of opportunity to act and narrowing options. The 44-page draft summary for policymakers obtained by AFP catalogs the 1,001 ways in which our species has plundered the planet and damaged its capacity to renew the resources upon which we depend, starting with breathable air, drinkable water, and productive soil. The impact of humanity's expanding footprint and appetites has been devastating. Up to 1 million species face extinction, many within decades, according to the report. And 3/4 of the Earth's land surfaces have been severely altered. I haven't yet, by the way, seen a list of the 1 million species that are facing extinction. My guess is because the list doesn't exist. It's just a wild guess. That is propaganda, rhetoric to make your point. It also states that 3/4 of the Earth's land surface has been severely altered. This, again, is a wild, speculative statement that has no proof behind it whatsoever. Now it says 1/3 of ocean fish stocks are in decline, and the rest, barring a few, are harvested at the very edge of sustainability. A dramatic die-off in pollinating insects, especially bees, threatens essential crops valued at $500 billion annually. 10-year-old targets adopted in 2010 under the United Nations Biodiversity Treaty to expand protected areas, slow species and forest loss, and reduce pollution will, with one or two exceptions, fail badly, based on an underlying report that draws from 400 experts and weighs in at 1,800 pages. The executive summary has to be vetted line by diplomats with scientists at their elbow. Well, of course, scientists will be at their elbow because the scientists represent technocracy or sustainable development, which are functionally equivalent. The Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, document, once approved, will be released on May 6th. Historically, conservation biology has focused on the plight of pandas, polar bears, and a multitude of less charismatic animals and plants that humanity is harvesting, eating, crowding, or poisoning into oblivion. Wow. Watson told AFP ahead of this Paris meeting, up to now, we have talked about the importance of biodiversity mostly from an environmental perspective. Now we are saying that nature is crucial for food production, for pure water, for medicines, and even social cohesion, and to fight climate change. Forests and oceans, for example, soak up half of the planet warming greenhouse gases we spew into the atmosphere. If they didn't, Earth might already be locked into an unlivable future of runaway global warming. Well, this article goes on, and I encourage you to read the article because you need to understand the importance and the magnitude of what the United Nations is pulling off on planet Earth. Biodiversity doctrine was released from the United Nations from the UN Environmental Program, UNEP, that sponsored the Agenda 21 conference in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro. By 1995, the Biodiversity Treaty was fully defined in a 1,100-page book. I have it in my lap right now. It's weighting me down. I can't use my keyboard. This thing is huge. The pages are 8.5 by 11 inches in size, and as I said, it's over 1,100 pages. It must weigh at least 12 pounds. I've been through this document quite thoroughly in times past. I'm holding it in my lap again to read you just a little bit out of what the original biodiversity doctrine came out with. This 1,100-page book was distributed to every nation on the planet, to every environmental minister, to anybody who is remotely connected with environmental policy, and political leaders, and university teachers and department heads, etc. This book was spread all over the planet. The instructions that went along with it is that in order to achieve Agenda 21 policy, Agenda 21 was conceived and hatched in 1992. In order to achieve that agenda for the 21st century, all of the items contained in the Global Biodiversity Assessment needed to be achieved. This was the Bible for making Agenda 21 a real thing. Now, yes, there is an Agenda 21 book. You can still buy it on Amazon.com for about $40. And it contained a lot of framework information about what Agenda 21 is all about. The Biodiversity Assessment merely gave teeth to it, substance to it. It said, do these things. This is what we must do. This was the marching orders for Agenda 21, and it didn't come out in this book until 1995. I want to read you the contents of a pull-out box on page 764 of the Global Biodiversity Assessment. The title of this is Contrasting Attitudes About Nature. contrasting attitudes. This is a series of one statement versus another statement. There's 5. I want to read them all to you. Humans as one strand in nature's web versus humans set apart from nature. Now, there are some of us that believe that humans, in fact, are set apart from nature. Yes, we are part of the world, but in the UN's eyes and the biodiversity assessment's eyes, humans as one strand are part of nature's web. The opposing view is humans are set apart from nature. They state that all living creatures are considered equal versus the alternative view, which would be ours, humans are superior to all of creation. They believe culture, nature as a continuum. No such thing as a wilderness versus culture, civilization, human, and nature considered wild. They believe the natural way is right and human activity should be molded along nature's rhythms versus human technology is superior, needs to mold nature to suit human needs. They believe nature has an integral set of different values, cultural, spiritual, and material, versus nature is predominantly a material resource, that is an economic resource. So we see very clearly also in this last statement that they attribute spiritual values to nature, not just material, not just cultural, but a spiritual value. And this is very closely related to nature worship or earth worship. That's correct. Now, most people never read the entire Global Biodiversity Assessment book. Not only was it a boring-looking book from UNEP, but it was also 1,100 pages, and it was quite expensive to purchase. Nevertheless, as I said earlier, this is the book that gives teeth and substance to Agenda 21 that was created in 1992, the Agenda for the 21st Century. In this book, on page 773, I want to point out that it states, in contrast, a reasonable estimate for an industrialized world society at the present North American material standard of living would be 1 billion. At the more frugal European standard of living, 2 to 3 billion would be possible. These figures represent not just the contrasting material demands of developed and developing societies, but also their contrasting dietary habits. Huxley in 1984 considers that dietary habits lie at the root of many of our troubles and calculates the average Westerner consumes 65 kilograms of grain per year, while the meat consumed accounts for over 900 kilograms of grain per year, and it goes on ad infinitum. But I want you to understand that the United Nations, through the Global Biodiversity Assessment book, 1,100 pages plus, states that the world, in order for it to be sustainable, should contain 1 billion people, or, according to European standard of living, maybe 2 to 3 billion people at the most. They do not say how population might be reduced from the current level of over 7 billion people down to 1 billion people, but this stresses and underscores the radical craziness of all of these issues of biodiversity assessment. In this book, things are declared unsustainable, like cattle, for instance, because cattle produce flatulence. Golf courses are unsustainable because golf courses have too much grass and use too much water. Traditional farming is unsustainable because it's too inefficient. The use of water is unsustainable, where people should be limited to how much water they're allowed to use on planet Earth every day. This is the same United Nations that promises to eliminate poverty on Earth. All forms of poverty, they say, with the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, let me tell you, if it were possible for a society to obey every instruction in this Global Biodiversity Assessment, all 1,100 pages, if they struck out all those things from human behavior and activity, you would end up with a third world country that resembles a banana republic. It would reduce all of mankind basically to living back on the land again, in poverty, and enforced reduction of all productive human activity. This is anti-human at the very least. And I pointed out in previous broadcasts that The very thing that the United Nations and all these people say that they're going to do, namely save the world, is designed to do just the opposite. It's going to destroy the ecology and the ecosystem and the economic system in the end. If they have their way, there won't be anything left, really, to enjoy. The United Nations Program for the World has infiltrated our nation from top to bottom. It's been pushed into every city, every county, every little burg in America through a number of programs. Some are institutionalized within our government. Some are from the outside, like with ICLEI and like United Nations and NGOs coming into communities directly, helping them write their general plans to include all this biodiversity nonsense. We have been infected with a virus that has no vaccine, believe me, and it's up to the people of our country to root this out of our local communities first, because if we don't, the fabric of our society will never change. And it doesn't matter what happens on a national level at this point. The national government is not going to save your local community. That's your business. And this kind of stuff has already shown up in force in virtually every community in America. We have a big job ahead of us. I can't stress enough how important it is for people to really understand what technocracy and sustainable development are trying to do to planet Earth. We have to stop thinking, well, this can't happen in America. It's already happening in America. Every town, every city, every county, every state, every little last burg in America has been influenced, if not taken over, by thinking on sustainable development. It's already here. The federal government will not save us from this. It's up to us and local communities to root this out of our local community. This is the fabric of our nation, and it's dyed a different color than what it originally was. Only we can make that difference. We cannot expect a savior somehow to come down from Washington, D.C. and make things right in our own local communities. So I encourage you to get a copy of Technocracy, The Hard Road to World Order, or a copy of Technocracy Rising, The Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. These two books, at this point, are the definitive analysis of technocracy and sustainable development, what they intend to do to our nation and to our world, and how they are doing it. This is just critical to understand. Until you get the whole picture, you only have a partial picture, which is very misleading and leads people to think of other things like, well, maybe it's Marxist, maybe it's socialists that are doing this to us. Well, it's not. Socialism, Marxism, and communism are certainly being used as cannon fodder at this point to break the society down to where technocracy can take root. But that's the only function of these other isms, is to get rid of the existing system so that the technocratic world can take over. Well, I'm Patrick Wood for Technocracy News and Trends. Have a great day.